didn't know this about myself, but I was born in Fort McMurray, Alberta, in the north of Alberta. It's the source of the, up until recently, 1/4 of the United States oil supply. And I am a child of oil country. I did not know that about myself. It was the ordinary feature of my life. My mother grew up on a subsistence farm in central Manitoba. She grew up, as she told me, learning to honor the land because it was the difference between starving and staying alive. And I grew up with a mingled sense of messages that on one hand said, erase your Ukrainian identity, erase your ethnicity, assimilate, and move into progress. So when my mother moved to Fort McMurray, it was a space a little bit like a war zone that convenes people from such different backgrounds in different places. This massive infrastructure of extraction industry, where my mother heard a symphony orchestra for the first time. It's later on when she went to Edmonton that she took her first ride on an escalator. And she put me in violin lessons as soon as she could, because not because she wanted me to be a musician, but because she wanted me to be educated. She wanted me to be a familiar of beauty. She wanted me to be a familiar of greater opportunities than she had available to her. So a lot of my work in the last few years has been organized around a kind of a conscious reconciliation and reckoning with the circumstances of my birth. And the fact that it was oil money and the employment in the oil industry that drove the economy of the place where I was from, that was the conditions of my birth, and that required in me kind of a relearning, a renegotiating of the basic circumstances of my life, that I needed no reason to exist or to make music or to make a sound other than the fact of my birth. But I did a thing that was a little bit unusual for a child of my class and place and time, which was that I seized upon the violin as a kind of a technology. There was an infrastructure in place thanks to imperialism. There was an infrastructure in place that if you learned how to take the teachings and the learnings and do what your teachers told you to do, you could get better and better. You could audition and you could get out. And I went from being a first generation college goer to going into Juilliard in New York City, which was a massive culture shock for me. And I think it took about another 30 years after that to understand that the thing that defines me the most, what gives me my strength and what gives me my voice, is my grandmother's hands. And it was her teaching me how to live in relationship to the land. It was her living the lessons to me of a life before oil. And so I remember her right now in particular when I make cabbage rolls, polipchi, when I make vareniki or pierogies. I have a kind of a strength, which is that I do know how it is to live in two worlds at once. And I know how to play the fiddle and the violin. I know what it is to live in New York City, and I know what it is to live in a life before oil. And those are the values that I'm trying to live out and that I'm trying to teach to the students that I work with, and the things that I'm trying to unlearn, and the Eurocentric colonial bits, and the power that I'm trying to come into a continually closer relationship with and to grow and to share with others.